This podcast is dedicated to people who are ready to take ownership of what it means to be born with high sensory intelligence and how to bring it into service for business, career, and organizations globally. Hello and a very warm welcome to the High Sensory Intelligence podcast with me, Willow McIntosh, founder of Illuminance and leader of the High Sensory Intelligence movement. And I am interested and excited this week to talk about the concept of grounding. Now, as many of you know, one of the advantages that we have as high sensory people, and also one of the challenges that we face, is our ability to process sensory data so deeply and quite profoundly. Now, what this can mean is that we tend to get lost and we can spin off into a great deal of over-processing. That is in terms of over-processing our thoughts, and often the mistake that we make where we start to identify with our thoughts. Now, this is of course much easier said than done, and all of us as human beings to a greater or lesser degree identify with our thoughts. Now, this is a particular piece that we need to be super aware of and very careful with as high sensory people, especially because many of us are not in full ownership and recognition of our gifts and abilities as high sensory people. And as many of you know already, this is very much my mission in the world, to help us, those of us born with this amazing trait, born with the trait sensory processing sensitivity, to recognize it as a gift, as an ability, as something that nature deems as very, very important. It's found in 100 other species of animals as well as us, been found in many of the greatest leaders that the world has ever seen. So the importance of us making sure that we are not over-processing to the point where we are losing touch with and losing identification with what is real within us. So the importance of recognizing this ability as a gift and recognizing it as an important part of the makeup of the human race. It's occurring in between 15 to 20% of us. So it is very important for those of us that have it to live in alignment with the purpose that we have been given in order to bring it into the world, to make sure that it's of use and that we are being of service in the world with it. So in order to do this, part of our journey, part of our responsibility is to learn this process of grounding. So energetically, if you were to imagine the neurotransmissions going on in our brains as a movement of energy, almost like, not almost, it is the movement of electricity between synapses, of course. So if you were to imagine the flow of thoughts as an energetic movement, then what can happen is we sense and feel that movement of energy in our heads, and we tend to forget to engage with the rest of our bodies, and therefore spend a great deal of time in our heads over-processing and overthinking. Now, the trouble right there is that we are actually missing a very powerful reference point energetically, which is within our bodies. And our purpose, our sense of self, our truth, our contentment lies in the energetic reality of our bodies. Yes, you could say that it lies in the energetic reality of our energy body, as opposed to just a physical representation of our body. And therefore, if we are not spending time tuning into the energy of our hearts, tuning into the energy of our souls, then we tend to get stuck in this process of overthinking. So why is this important? Well, first of all, it is a very uncomfortable place to be stuck in our heads and to be overthinking on a constant basis. When we make the conscious decision to actually allow our consciousness, to allow our conscious awareness to drop into our bodies and to settle into the energy points that are in our body, in our hearts, in our sacrum, in the middle, in the core of our body, and also in the base of ourselves. When we do that, what we find is actually the thought processing slows down a great deal. And actually, what then happens in turn is we then begin to identify with what's true within ourselves. We begin to identify with the weight of ourselves, with the part of ourselves that is naturally in flow with the movement of life around us. Our processing minds are amazing tools, but they're bad masters. Our processing minds are very good for exactly that, for processing information, for witnessing, seeing, being consciously aware of sensory data and doing with it what needs to be done. However, if our sense of self is stuck up there, then we are at the mercy of our thoughts. If we're at the mercy of our thoughts, then we're giving our thoughts power over us and essentially then giving our power away. Now, if we are in conversation with others and we are over-processing what others are doing or saying around us, then we are essentially giving our power away to others if we are identifying ourselves with, if we are identifying our own identity with what's been said about us or with what other people seem to be doing in their lives around us, then we are giving our power away. So to remember to have this conscious interaction with the truth of ourselves means that we are learning to take responsibility for ourselves. We are learning to take responsibility for what is ours and for what is not ours. So with this process of identification with something that's outside of ourselves, or processing or identifying with the thoughts that are going on inside of our heads, what's happening is that that's a misplacement of power. That's a misplacement of taking responsibility for something that we can affect in the world, something that we can actually help and make change with, or whether it's not. And it really is quite simply that. Now, the reason again why this is so important is in order for us to be able to tune in and take take ownership of our gifts and abilities as a high sensory person, we must be able to be connected with the source of our power in order to be aligned with the gifts that we have. So if you were to consider yourself in your business, in your line of work, whatever it is, then if you are in a place of grounding, then you are literally accessing the energetic power of your heart and your soul and your body. If you are then taking action from that place, then you are taking aligned action. If we are taking action from the whims of our minds and the processing of our thoughts, then we are very likely to be making mistakes in our actions. We're not taking aligned action. We are reacting to the process of energy that's happening in our heads. If that is reactive in fear to something that someone said or something that we've thought or something that we are generally just experiencing in our kind of oversensory processing minds, then we are not responding appropriately. Then the word responsibility becomes broken down into a response ability. So we are able to respond much more appropriately if we are coming from a place of aligned grounding within ourselves. Moreover, it means that we are then attuned with and aligned with the ability that we have as a high sensory intelligent person. So in other podcast episodes, you would have heard me say how important it is for us to be in contact with and identify ourselves as having a gift, as having a superpower. So the extrasensory data that we are receiving on an ongoing basis is giving us a particular ability. And this is something that you will recognize in yourself as you learn to truly own it and also to actually bring it into practice in the world around you. So in other words, when you are among other people, you will be receiving data, you'll be receiving information that will enhance the experience that you're having, and it should be shared. It will entice you to take action, it will entice you to speak up, And depending on your area of expertise, it will be what makes you very good at what you do. So typically many of us are, we're known as royal advisors. So we are able to pick up on the environment around us. We're able to intuit and communicate. We're able to be a channel for information that's coming from higher and outside of us, and we're able to communicate that. So we tend to make very good coaches, consultants, healers, creative entrepreneurs. We have high levels of empathy, intuition, creativity abilities, and we are also very visionary. So all of that comes together into a particular skill that you have in your area of expertise within high sensory intelligence. Now, the trouble is, if we are not in a place of grounding, and what I mean by that is actually feeling our feet on the ground and feeling the weight of ourselves and our conscious awareness being in our core on a moment-to-moment basis, then it's very difficult to align to this gift of high sensory intelligence. Because the high sensory intelligence is exactly that. It is a sensory intelligence. It's not a thought intelligence, it's a sensory intelligence. Now, our sensory intelligence is deeply embedded in our senses and the experience of our bodies. So therefore, in order for us to be able to make use of it, we must be in tune and aligned with the core of who we are, because then we are receiving the more concentrated, more clear, and more empowered sensory intelligence. We are not then responding from the thoughts that are happening in our minds. Now, because our sensory intelligence is our ability to process data more deeply, it means that we have the tendency to process our thoughts deeply and then kind of get stuck on those. We identify with those and we respond from those. And that's where we make mistakes. So the invitation for you today is to begin a daily practice of grounding. And that can be in many different ways, in a way that works for you. For instance, every morning I begin my day with yoga, with a series of breathing techniques and a grounding meditation with some other things thrown in as well. And I'm sure you have your own bespoke way of your personal meditation process. And I highly recommend some kind of meditation that you are doing on a daily basis. So what that does is it's training our conscious awareness not to over-identify with our thoughts. So the daily practice of grounding is an important practice to have in your daily experience. And on a moment-to-moment basis, one of the best ways for grounding is actually to feel the sensation in our hands and our feet. So the sensation in our hands and our feet is quite busy because we are using our hands and feet a great deal of the time. So the actual sensation in our hands and feet is quite a busy sensation. So one way to kind of switch the habit of identifying with thoughts is to switch to the feeling of our feet on the ground, to the feeling of the tingling sensation that's happening in our hands much of the time, to focus on our breathing, to give our attention to our core, to feel the breath coming into our bodies, to say the word silence to our heads, and to say the word stillness to our hearts when we find we are in a place of over-processing and it's all getting very, very busy. Those are some techniques that I personally use. Now, what happens is the well of awareness gets bigger and you become more used to it when the conscious awareness comes into the body and comes into the seat and the grounding of who we are. That means that we are then naturally opening to the insights and intuition that comes from that part of ourselves. Our core intuition and insights come from the core of ourselves, not from the insults that tend to happen a great deal in our heads. So self-talk is another key indication of what's real, because negative self-talk, that's not the truth of ourselves. That's just the computer mind over-processing and just firing stuff at us. It's a bit like if you're trying to do something on your computer and perhaps you're trying to use a Word document to write a piece of information. Well, if the computer starts opening up your browser and starts opening up spreadsheets and just fires lots of stuff in front of you, then in the process of using your computer, you wouldn't stand for a computer that does that, for starters. And you'd make sure that everything was closed down in order for you to be able to process and do what you need to do on the document. Exactly the same thing is for us on a moment-to-moment basis. So when we are in alignment and attuned with ourselves and in action in accordance with what we feel is right inside of ourselves, if we are then bombarded by lots of thoughts that question that and react to what people think of it, or put judgments or whatever, or just negative self-talk, then we shouldn't be buying into that in exactly the same way we shouldn't be buying into an onslaught of interruption from our computers. So what we would do is we would close down those programs that are interrupting us on our computer, and in exactly the same way we should be closing down those excessive thought processes that are interrupting us and causing us to misalign with the truth of who we are. So the way to do that, as I say, is a continuous recognition of the truth of our grounding. And by using these techniques and by questioning our thoughts, by asking ourselves, is that thought actually true? By asking ourselves the question, is this thought process kind to myself right now? And do I really need to be feeding it? If the answer to that is no, then we know immediately that we are off down a rabbit hole of over-processing along a thought pattern that's definitely not serving us. So rather than me spending too much time focusing on the processes of how to do this, what I really would like to get across to you is the importance of making sure that we are grounded on a day-to-day basis, on a moment-to-moment basis, especially when it comes to decision making, especially when it comes to publishing anything, whether you're writing a document, whether you're doing something at work, wherever you may be in your process on a day-to-day basis. It's a check-in beforehand. Am I acting and responding from a place of grounding right now? Am I responsible for whatever is coming into my conscious awareness? If I'm responsible for this, then it's then my responsibility to respond and act from a place of grounding. If I'm not responsible for this that's coming into my conscious awareness, then I let that go and allow the person who is responsible for them to take care of what needs to be done. So from this place of grounding, we are in a much more empowered place to be aligned with our high sensory intelligence. This is a very, very key part of the ownership process, to make sure that we are actually open to the source of power that really guides us and really is the core energy behind our high sensory intelligence. And once we get used to responding and acting and being in that place, it's a much happier place to be. We are much less at the mercy to our thoughts, to other people, and to the things that trip us up on a day-to-day basis. Please remember how important you are, how important your gift and your purpose in the world as a high sensory intelligent person is. And you can help yourself to be better in service by remembering to be grounded on a moment-to-moment basis. If you have any questions, please do reach out to us. We would love to hear from you. Wherever you may be today, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you so much for listening and watching. Bye for now. Join me on the next masterclass where I'll show you how to reveal your own high sensory intelligence, bringing you into alignment with your true purpose, career, business, and personal success. To register your place today, visit highsensoryintelligence.com.